and he slits that guy's arm to the bone from shoulder to elbow. He's bleeding like crazy, but he still grabs Booth.
The Mercedes-Benz Interview Lounge.
We've known Patty for
a long time.
30-something years.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Well, how old is Jake now, your son?
My son is 28.
Okay, so I babysat Jake when he was first born.
Yes.
Wow.
And I had him when I was 3. So.
Yeah. So
There's that. And Froggy's in our Jacksonville studios. There's Froggy. And this is your first time to meet Gandhi.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, it's a pleasure.
So nice to meet you. I've heard so many good things.
Thank you.
So there's business going on, too, other than just hanging out with someone that I adore. I remember when we used to hang out. We used to hang out a lot.
A lot.
And we used to have long conversations about anything and everything. Mm-hmm. I always found Patty to be one of my most fascinating friends because she has many layers and she's very, very smart. History has always been what tickled your thing, you know?
Wow. And speaking of my thing.
But when Patty would start talking about anything from history, you could just watch her as if, she just opened up and became this bright, colorful flower.
Well, I sort of love it, and this is the thing, because I kind of believe that if you look back, and I am not like somebody who likes to follow the battle plan of whatever the wars were. I like the people, because I feel like if we can look back and we can see how they lived their lives and what they did, it gives us sort of a sense of where we are now and how we got here, and that is how we map forward and look at how we move forward in life. And so I'm fascinated with people and the stuff that either famous people or not so famous people did.
So, if you, like me, never really got into history class for whatever reason when you were in school.
And I didn't either, by the way, when I was a kid. It wasn't until I was late in college. I had a great history professor who made it live.
It takes someone like that.
Wow.
Who makes it change. So if you were like the rest of us and not interested, keep listening to Patty. We're talking about her new podcast, her podcast called The Backstory.
It is new, as of last week.
It is new. And what I love about the episodes, they're short.
5-6 minutes.
Yeah. It's perfect.
Oh, really?
They're little snackables.
That's so cool.
Because I think most of us, there are some great podcasts out there, but when they go 1-2 hours, it's like a real commitment. And sometimes you don't go back to it. You get out of the car, the bus, or the subway, and you forget about going back. I want to encapsulate these great little stories and not bog you down with too much, and just tell the story. I have to go back and say, you introduced me to Italy. We've had a few really fun times there.
A few.
And I took my kids there, and I remember we were in Venice one night, late at night, and you know how there's no streets, so you're walking through alleyways and up steps, and we walked up these steps that were like curved at the bottom, and the walls were curved. And my kids said to me, why are the steps, why do they have that curve in them? And I said, you know what that is? That is 1,000 years of life. People dragging their carts up these steps. People holding on to that wall. You touch that, you're touching 1,000 years of lives, and you're adding to it.
A wall that was one time as straight as an arrow.
Right.
Through years of touch.
Is
now curved. And there's history in that, the energy in that wall.
And that's really what it's all about, is connecting with the past. One of the stories, we were talking about this earlier, one of the stories that's coming up is about the ancient Olympics. And you go, oh, God, whatever, the ancient Olympics. Well, there are a couple interesting things about the Olympics that were held 3,000 years ago in Greece. First of all all of the athletes competed completely in the nude. They were, that's just the way they did it. And before they went out, they would rub themselves down with olive oil. They'd go out, they'd compete, they would go back to the locker room, and there was a guy in there who had this thing called a strigil, and he would rake over their body with this metal thing and get this goo off of them that was a mix of olive oil, sweat, dead skin, dust. They would bottle that, and that is one of the number one ways that those athletes made money and that the gymnasiums made money. They would sell it. People went nuts over it. They would rub it on their bodies for everything from virility to menstrual cramps to arthritis. And, you think, well, that's really creepy and weird. But look at what we do.
I think it's kind of hot. I'm in.
We put Botox in our heads. Yeah. We sell sneakers. We all just want to get through this thing that we're living in and figure out a way to make a living off of our skill set. And that's really what this is about. It's about looking back at people from a long time ago and realizing they just wanted the same things we want. And I just love that about history. So I like the people. I like looking at those lives and how they lived their lives.
Go ahead.
So when you think about, you said, history is the way that we move forward. When you look at the last few years of what's been happening with the pandemic and everything here,
Sure.
do you see history in the making? Do you see things that you're like, looking forward, this is going to be crazy?
I see it as an opportunity to learn and to say, okay, how do we take what we're living through, whether it's the political climate or it's our health, it's climate change, all of this, we have an opportunity to look at that and say, okay, now we can take this. And, there's a philosopher who said, we understand life by looking back, but we have to live it forward. So look back, understand it, but man, you got to look forward and you got to say, okay, how do we take this and make it into something? And I've tried to do that with my life. I've been through some difficulties in my life, and every one of them, I'm so friggin', I almost said the wrong word. I'm so friggin' grateful for, because every one of those has strengthened me and given me an opportunity to look forward and say, okay, how do I take this and make it into something new and fresh and vibrant? And I think that's the beauty of history.
And that's the thing, and we discuss this a lot every time, especially these past few years. We go through some crisis or challenge. I'm always the first to say, hey, what are we learning here? It may be too soon, too fresh in the middle of it. But once you get out of it, you got to learn from these things. And that's what history is so great for. Oh. By the way, if you're just turning us on, Patty Steele, she's right here, old friend of ours. Her podcast is called The Backstory. It's a part of our Elvis Duran podcast network.
Well.
I can't even tell you. I cried when they called me and said that you wanted that to be on your network, because I mean, I love you, but I understand. You have a certain thing you do, and does history really fit into that?
Oh, absolutely.
So it does.
But that's the beauty about podcasts. They're deep and narrow. You could talk about any subject, and like rice. You could have a podcast about rice, and that's okay.
The rice
that's
How many ways
interesting.
to cook the rice?
Right.
For instance, Gandhi is a huge fan of science. So I could see
I
you
love
doing
that.
a science podcast.
I would love to.
Danielle's a huge fan of Broadway and musicals and kids
Books. I wanna do a
and
book.
books.
Behind the curtain.
Yes. Oh.
There you go.
There's a podcast.
You can have that.
So my point is this, and you hear the passion Patty speaks, that she has with speaking of history. You have that as well. You have a passion, as you listen to this, about something. Start a podcast. We've got a massive
the
bunch
beauty of it.
We have a lot of real estate waiting for you at the Elvis Duran Podcast
Hey.
Network.
I was telling him today that I heard one. It's called "Date My Abuelita," and basically that's exactly what it is. You have to get through Abuelita to get to that person.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so different and it's so it's quirky. I love it.
Gandhi, what kind of science do you like, or do you like it all?
I like it all. I'm a student, so I would need somebody else who is the actual expert. Like in a dream world, I would do a podcast with Bill Nye, because I could talk to that guy all day.
I know,
and
he
he's
is,
amazing,
isn't he? And he makes it entertaining.
He does. And there are so many little things that we learn about all the time with these different podcasts. When it comes to you and the history, is there a specific part of history that you focus on, or is it like everything?
I love all of it, but I really love the early 1800s, and it's only because if you look before like 1820, everybody lived the same way they'd lived for thousands of years. You got light from fire, you rode on the back of horses, and that was kind of it. And then all of a sudden, you had everything from trains to cameras to that. There's like a 40-year history right there where technology all of a sudden kicked in, and that's fascinating because it impacted people's lives. It changed fashion. It changed what we understood about people all over the world. Suddenly we knew so things that were going on long distances away. We also were able to carry illness a lot further, like we can now. So I love all of that, but I just love people, and I love looking back and seeing how did you live your life.
How do you find who you want to talk about from history? Like, do you just happen upon it, or is it?
I go nuts. Like, I'm constantly making. And part of it has to do with things that are going on in the world right now. Like all of this smoke in the sky, has been really disturbing to us because, it has to do with climate change. It has to do with these fires and that kind of thing. But if you look back, there was a year, 1816, where there was the biggest volcano eruption in the history of the world. It actually happened in 1815, but the smoke covered the earth.
Where was it?
It was in Indonesia, Mount Tamabora or something like that. And what happened was in the ensuing years, it actually wiped out, like 100,000 people died of starvation because crops were destroyed. Animals couldn't live because there was no food for them. Religions evolved because nobody knew why it was happening. They all thought it was the end of the world. And people, it's what started, was a big part of the westward expansion. People had to get away from New England where it was really bad. So all of this stuff, people were just trying to figure out what's going on. They're just trying to get through it. And, we're all here for such a short time, but we're just trying to get through it. So if you can get a little bit of a map and a little bit of an understanding of how other people got through this thing called life, there's a calm inside because you say, okay, people have been through this. We have more information now, and in the future we'll have even more information. It's calming because you just realize we're not alone,
Patty, take us to the theater when President Lincoln decided to leave the White House and go see a play.
Yes, our American cousin. So he shows up, and he couldn't get anybody to go to the theater with him because everybody hated Mary Todd Lincoln, his wife. She's a bitch. I can say that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they had like 13 people turn him down. And finally they got this young couple, engaged couple, who weirdly were also stepbrother and sister, but whatever. So they said, sure, we'll go to the theater with you. They get there, they sit down. As we all know, John Wilkes Booth comes in, boom, he hits Lincoln. But what happened was, so you have Henry and Clara, the couple, sitting next to him. So what happens is, Henry stands up and he's like, I got to do something. And he goes after Booth, who also had a knife on him. And he slits that guy's arm to the bone from shoulder to elbow. Oh. He's bleeding like crazy, but he still grabs Booth. And that's why Booth tripped as he jumped down to the stage and broke his ankle or leg or whatever he broke.
Right.
But everybody blamed Henry, said, is he part of the conspiracy? Why didn't he save the president? And really, there was no saving the president. This guy came in the door and Lincoln was right there and he shot him. But it so impacted him, it so disturbed him that as time went by, they got married, he descended further and further into insanity. He'd also been through a lot in the war. They eventually, his wife said, everywhere we went, we felt like zoo animals. So they moved to Europe. They moved to Germany. And one Christmas Eve, he really bottomed out, and his wife had gone to bed, and he takes a gun and a knife and slaughters her.
Oh.
Then he goes after their children, but somebody who worked in the house heard the commotion, locked the door, got the kids out through a window. He plunged a knife into himself, but lived. And he wound up living till 1911 in an insane asylum.
President Lincoln's +1.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Everybody, and this is the thing, everybody focuses on the shining star at the center. And I love Lincoln. I'm a huge Lincoln fan. But to me, these people just outside the spotlight, what happens to them? And in that time, nobody saw someone who would be in the box with him as a victim. They saw him as part of the problem. And there's ghost stories involved in all of it, but it's really kind of a fascinating thing how times change.
Wow.
Again, this is our really good friend Patty Steele. Her podcast is called Backstory with Patty Steele, and these are just a few of some of the stories you're going to hear as you listen to this incredible podcast.
It's fun.
Now,
fun. And they're short. Again, they're only 5-6 minutes long. So, you're headed to pick the kids up or you're headed to work. You can listen for 5 or 6 minutes, or you could listen if you'd like to more.
How many are up there already?
There's going to the fourth one goes up tomorrow.
Wow.
So it's new because it just started last week.
Okay.
Wow.
I'm loving it, and I'm loving the fact that you, Elvis, put this on your network.
Oh, God, no.
I love you, and I thank you.
It's the only culture we have on our podcast. I mean, the close second is Scotty B does serial killers, where they review breakfast cereals.
I was going to say, I love serial killers.
Have there been any pieces of history that you grew up thinking, okay, this is a story, this is the one way that I was always taught, and then you find out all of these other things about it, and it just blows your mind.
Yeah, that's, a lot of this stuff. I'm, as you are, a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect. I love architecture. I had no idea there was a mass murder at his house because he had left his wife and kids for this woman who left her husband and kids and moved in together. And they went to Europe, and then they came back. He built this house, and then he was in Chicago building this big club, and somebody who worked at the house lost his mind. And there were people who worked for Frank eating lunch. He either nailed the doors or locked all the doors to the dining room. Then he goes out to the porch where she's sitting with her 2 kids who were visiting, and he takes an axe and kills them. Then he puts kerosene all around the dining room, sets that on fire. And then as the people try to escape through the window, he's out there with the axe. And nobody ever really kind of understands why he did this. He died maybe 3 weeks later.
Crazy. Wow. I've been to that house, Taliesin.
Really?
Yeah.
That's where he used to have a lot of his architectural students visit this area, and he would teach them. Then he also had Taliesin West out in Phoenix or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, they told us that story, and I'm like, wow.
God.
Is there any other story? I don't want you to give away too much.
No,
but give us a taste of one more thing that you think we will find kind of fascinating.
Well, so there's another one that was out last Friday that I kind of love. And when I was first proposing it, people were looking at me like, who the heck cares? It was about the evolution of women's bathing suits.
Oh, no, we all care about
Yeah,
that,
we
especially
do.
Danielle.
I still cry in the dressing room.
She cries every year.
I can't.
Well,
Maybe you should have done it earlier when they had more cloth.
well, a lot more. If you go back to the late 17th through the 1800s, I happened to be looking at this book, and I saw beaches on Long Island because I used to live in Lawrence, Long Island, so I knew the South Shore. And I saw, what are those things lined up on the beach? They looked like cabanas, but they were on wheels.
Right.
So I did a little bit of looking into it, and what I discovered was, in those days, women, if they were modest, they'd go to the beach completely dressed, your beautiful gloves and petticoats and hats and boots, etc. They would get into this cabana. They would change into a bathing suit that was equally huge, made of wool.
Oh my God.
They would
drown.
Yeah, they'd knock on the door, and someone would pick up the cabana and drag it into the water, open the doors sideways, both sides to block the view from. You would walk down the steps, get in the water, they'd tie a rope around your waist because the bathing suits weighed about 30 pounds wet.
Oh my
You'd
God.
paddle around a little bit. You go back in the cabana, dry off, get dressed, get dragged out, and emerge with your gloves and your hat. And
I vote we bring those back.
Wow.
Talk about a workout.
Yeah, that's too much work.
But actually, the government, first of all, the Olympics changed it. That's when they started moving towards sleeker bathing suits and getting arrested for it. And then...
Really?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And then at the beginning of World War II, the government said, we need the fabric. You got to cut at least 10% from women's bathing suits. And so the manufacturers went, cool. So they had two-piece. They covered your belly button. They had like a bra top and a granny panty bottom. And then by the end of the war, there was a guy in Paris, of course, and he decided to make what looks like a regular bikini today. And the problem is no model would put it on. So he hired a showgirl from one of the big places in Paris, and she came and put this thing on, and people went nuts. And they called it the bikini because that same week there was a nuclear test done in the Bikini Atoll in the South Pacific. And he said, this is it. He's a marketing guy. This is going to be a bombshell. That's how he
Wow.
And that's where the bikini got its name.
And that woman's name? Patty Steele. the first bikini model of all time.
70 years ago.
Now today, these bikinis and these bathing suits have no fabric whatsoever.
No, right. So we went literally from being in 30 pounds of wet wool to thongs in not that long a time. 100.
That's so fascinating.
Wow.
Can there be a happy medium?
So these are some of the many fascinating things you can learn through history and told beautifully, as you can tell.
And shortly.
Shortly.
Which we like.
You can tell she has a very, 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 very strong grasp of the English language,
Aw.
and how to describe things by painting pictures. Patty Steele. It's the backstory. It's the podcast. I want everyone to. Okay, you sign up for it and you follow it and you review it. Is that there's 3 things you got to do? What are they? Yes,
Sure.
those things.
All that and
Subscribe, like, and follow.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yes.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah,
Okay.
subscribe, like, and follow, so you get notifications when a new one comes
Can
out.
I just tell you how much I love you?
I love you too, my Patty.
You're my baby.
Thank you.
I've known you since you were a new baby, and I love
No, well, in my
And
20s.
what was your nickname again?
Beaver.
I'd like to hear the 5-minute episode.
I gave
on the
him that
history
a
of
long
that.
time ago. It's led to some really randy conversation.
What'd you say, Gandhi?
I said I would like to hear the 5-minute episode on the history of that.
A beaver.
Calling Elvis
The
Beaver.
history of Beaver. All right, well, Patty, thank you for coming in.
I'm
and
delighted.
Kate,
Love
her
it.
beautiful daughter's here. Katie, we love you.
she's
Thank you guys for
my
coming
angel.
in. All right, we got to take a break. Thank you, Patty.
The Mercedes-Benz Interview Lounge.